Doctor, you have to do something now.
I understand your frustration, but we must follow protocol.
Protocol? My family is suffering.
I promise we are doing everything we can.
Cha Jin-woo spent $100 million to save his daughter. She was dying anyway, 6 years old, 9 days without food. Then a night nurse woke at 4:20 a.m. and found a bowl on the table, empty, a spoon inside, a keycard on the elevator, a gunman on the stairs. 5 of Asia's best chefs, 2 floors down, 140 meals. Every one refused. Someone walked through all of it in the dark, fed his dying child, and vanished. It took him 11 days to find her. She had been living in his house, 6 years. Before we go on, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I read every one. Because the woman who made that bowl had something $100 million could not buy, and she had been carrying it for 4 years, 11 feet down the hallway from the man who needed it most. 14 hours earlier, the richest man in Seoul stood in that same hallway and listened to a doctor tell him his money had run out of things to buy. Not the money. The money was fine, more than he could spend in 4 lifetimes, sitting in accounts on 3 continents under names that weren't his. What ran out was the list. For 11 months, there had always been one more name at the bottom of it, one more surgeon, one more institute, one more man in Zurich or Houston or Osaka who might know the thing the last one didn't. Now there was nothing under the last name but white paper. Rain came sideways against the glass. 40 floors down, the city moved the way it always moved. Up here, there was only the hum of machines and the sound of a very small chest going up and down. He had built this floor himself. No hospital. Hospitals have hallways, hallways have people, and people talk. So he bought the monitors and the pumps and the sterile air handling instead, and he hired a doctor away from the best children's ward in the country, and paid her enough to make ethics a private matter between her and God. There was a nurse's station where the piano used to be. "Say it again," he said. Dr. Seo Min-kyung did not sigh. She had learned early that this man read a sigh as an insult. Her gut has stopped working. The treatment saved her life, and it damaged her intestines. We've fed her through a line in her chest for 4 months to hold her weight, and that line is now hurting her liver. To turn this around, her gut has to be used, which means she has to swallow food, by mouth, then put it in her mouth. We've tried. She holds it. She turns her head. Twice she's choked, and choking will kill her faster than the liver will. She closed the chart. There is no version of this where money helps. She has to want it, and a child cannot be ordered to want something. Cha Jin-woo didn't move. He was 36, and he had ended the careers of men twice his age just by staying still in front of them. How long? 6 weeks, perhaps 8. At the far end of that hall, past the freight doors where the linen came up and the laundry went down, a woman stood very still with a tray in her hands. She wasn't supposed to be on that floor. She'd been told in writing by 2 different people. The bowl on her tray was still warm through the cloth, and she had been standing there long enough to hear the words 6 weeks. Nobody in that hallway knew her name. She had worked in that building for 6 years, and the man standing 20 feet away from her, being told his daughter had 6 weeks, was the reason nobody knew it. Cha Jin-woo. In certain rooms in that city, you didn't say that name at full volume. He wasn't born to it. His father drove, then collected, then did something else, and died on a Tuesday in a parking garage in Incheon without ever owning a house. Jin-woo took the organization at 29, far too young, and spent every year since proving it by never letting anyone watch him be uncertain about anything. He wore gray, short hair, pressed shirts, low voice. He let a question sit 4 or 5 seconds before he answered it, and men confessed things they hadn't been asked. There was ink at his collar, the tail of something dark that stopped exactly where a shirt would hide it. He didn't wear his wedding ring on his finger anymore. He wore it on a thin chain, inside his shirt. When he was tired, he'd catch himself holding it through the fabric. In 11 months, he had spent a little over $100 million. A surgical team flew from Boston with their own refrigeration. A liver specialist in Kyoto on a monthly salary to read one child's blood. A research group in Copenhagen funded for a study nobody asked for, because one paragraph of their paper gave him hope for 9 days. An entire floor of his own building gutted and rebuilt in 5 weeks by men paid never to describe what they'd built. And 2 rules in that house, spoken so rarely that the staff had stopped thinking of them as rules and started thinking of them as weather. First, the east kitchen stayed shut, not locked. That was the strange part. Double doors at the end of a corridor, a copper pot rack behind them, a window facing north. 4 years ago, in the middle of a July night, Cha Jin-woo pulled those doors closed and went to bed, and nobody had seen them open since. The cleaners wiped the outside on Thursdays. That was all. Second, nobody said the name Soyeon, and at the other end of that floor, under a blanket with rabbits printed on it, was the reason both rules mattered. Cha Ye-rin was 6. She was 2 when her mother died, and she didn't remember her mother's face, only a bracelet with a bell on it. The feeling of somebody's chin on top of her head, a song about a boat. She was small before she got sick. Now she was 17 kilograms, and her wrist disappeared inside a grown person's hand. She had stopped asking for anything since March. That was the part the doctors couldn't chart. In the spring, the wanting closed off. Not all at once, but the way a tap closes. No requests, no complaints, nothing she reached for. She'd answer you in 1 word if you made her, then go back to the ceiling. Anyone who sat with her for 10 minutes could feel her in there, watching, keeping score. She had simply decided she was finished participating, and she stopped eating. The only power a dying 6-year-old has in a building full of adults who can do anything they want. Her father came at 11 every night, jacket over the back of the chair. He'd talk about nothing, the weather, a dog he saw, a man who annoyed him at a meeting, in a low, steady voice, for 1 hour, while she looked at the ceiling. Then he'd stand up, put his hand flat on top of her head for a second, and leave. He had done this 260 times. He never once mentioned her mother. He thought he was protecting her. She had asked about her twice. Both times he changed the subject. She never asked again, about her mother, or about anything else. He was the reason she stopped asking. And 11 feet down that hallway was a woman who knew all 3 things nobody upstairs did. The mother, the recipe, and why that child had stopped wanting anything. She was not permitted on that floor. Her name was Nia Whitfield, 28 years old, Baltimore, Maryland, by way of a town in Korea most Americans have never heard of. Her mother was a sergeant. 2 tours at Camp Humphreys, and Nia went both times, which meant that from 7 to 14, she lived in an apartment off base with a rice cooker in the kitchen and a Korean lady downstairs named Mrs. Guak, who fed her sesame candy and corrected her grammar. 3 years in a Korean school. Kids touched her hair without asking, and she learned to say "don't do that" in a language her mother couldn't understand. Then Baltimore, high school, and her mother's cough turned out not to be a cough. Sergeant Denise Whitfield died at 44, with her mother holding one hand and her daughter holding the other. So Odessa Whitfield raised the rest of her. 73 years old, 31 years in a hotel laundry downtown, and opinions about the correct way to fold a fitted sheet that she'd share whether or not you asked. 3rd row alto, loud, at a church on Pennsylvania Avenue. Called everybody baby, including men she was actively arguing with. And when her granddaughter came home from that hospital at 19, with her mother's dog tags in her fist and nothing behind her eyes, Odessa didn't say anything wise. She put a pot on the stove and made grits. Every night for a month. Butter, stirred slowly, cooked so long they went silky. She'd set the bowl down and say, "Eat 2 spoons for me, then you can stop." And Nia would eat 2 spoons, and then she'd eat the rest. And one night, about 5 weeks in, she finished the whole bowl and started crying, and Odessa just kept her hand moving in circles on her back and never said one word about it. At 22, the money ran out. Not dramatically, it just ran out, the way it does. She was in a public library on a Tuesday afternoon, looking at overseas listings when she found it. Household position, Seoul, private residence, live-in, sponsored visa, Korean required. She could fold a fitted sheet. She could speak the language. She was hired over the phone. Here is what 6 years of that work does. You become furniture. That's not self-pity, it's the job description. The whole point of good staff in a house like that is that the family never has to see the machine that runs it. She came up the freight elevator. She used the back corridor with the grey floor. She had been in the same room as Cha Jin-woo about 200 times, carrying linen past him, refilling a water jug during a meeting he didn't pause, standing against a wall with her eyes down while he took a call that made a grown man on the other end start begging. In 6 years, he had never once looked at her face. She knew things about that household nobody knew she knew. That Yoon Tae-sik, the boss's right hand, kept a photograph of a daughter in Busan in his jacket and hadn't seen her in 9 years. That Bae Sun-ok, the head housekeeper, took her blood pressure pills standing up in the pantry so nobody would see. She knew which of the security men prayed, and every night at 10:15, for 4 years, she went the long way around the 40th floor to switch on the small lamp in the corridor outside Yerin's room. Nobody told her to do that. It came from one night in the second winter, when a very little girl came out of that room, barefoot at 11 at night, stood in the dark hallway, and said, in Korean, to the only person there, "I don't like this part." And Nia said, "Then we'll leave a light on this part." She kept doing it through the 4 months the child was downstairs, with a tube in her chest. You don't stop keeping a promise just because the person has stopped being able to notice. Then came the 9th day. 11:30 at night, in the lower laundry, Nia Whitfield made the decision that ended her life as she had arranged it. She'd been thinking about it for 4 years. That's the truth of it. 4 years of finding a reason every single day not to. The reason had a name, a phone number, and a dialysis schedule. Odessa's kidneys started failing 18 months after Nia moved to Seoul. 3 sessions a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, at a center on the west side of Baltimore. 2 years ago, the coverage shifted in a way nobody could explain to either of them in plain English. What Nia understood was the number at the bottom. She wired money on the 1st and the 15th. She hadn't taken a vacation in 6 years. She hadn't bought a coat in 4. Her job paid for her grandmother's blood to be cleaned. Her job existed because of a contract. The contract was what let her stay in the country, and every link in that chain ran through the man on the 40th floor. So she kept her mouth shut for 4 years. Then she stood in a hallway and heard a doctor say 6 weeks. The main kitchen was dark and cold and enormous. She didn't touch the overhead lights, only the small one over the range. She took a saucepan. She took the coarse yellow cornmeal she'd been buying with her own money from an import shop in Itaewon for 6 years, kept in a jar in the staff cupboard, with her name on masking tape on the lid. She didn't make the dead woman's recipe. Not that night. She couldn't have made herself do it that night. She made her grandmother's grits. Water, salt, cornmeal going in slowly, with the whisk moving so it wouldn't clump. Flame as low as it goes. 22 minutes of stirring, which is the whole secret, and the reason almost nobody makes them right. You can't walk away. You stand there, and you move your arm, and you think about your life. Butter at the end. A lot of it. Loose enough to pour. Thin enough that a child who has forgotten how to swallow doesn't have to remember all at once. Covered bowl. Freight elevator at 10 past midnight. Past the nurse's station, where the night girl was asleep with her chin on her collarbone. Bowl on the rolling table, beside a sleeping 6-year-old. Then she left. She didn't stay to watch. She wanted to. She went back down to the laundry and folded towels that were already folded until her hands stopped shaking. The night nurse woke at 4:20, found a bowl she couldn't account for, and did the only thing she'd been trained to do about it. 04:20. The patient took approx 3 spoons unassisted. First oral intake in 9 days. Source of food unknown. At 7 in the morning, Cha Jin-woo stood in that room holding that piece of paper, looking at an empty bowl with a spoon in it, and asked the only question that mattered. Who was in here? Nobody could tell him, so he hunted. The way he did everything. By 9, a man from his detail was in a chair in front of a laptop with 14 hours of footage. By 10, they'd found the thing that made Yoon Tae-sik go quiet before he brought it upstairs. The camera covering the 40th floor freight lobby had been dead since the 2nd week of June, not sabotaged. A maintenance ticket was raised twice and closed twice by a contractor who no longer worked in the building. Somebody had carried food into the most protected room in Seoul, and the one lens that would have caught them had been off for 7 weeks. So he did the second thing. Money. 3 cooks the first week, 2 more the second. A man who ran the kitchen of a hotel in Gangnam with a 2-year waiting list. A woman who specialized in nutrition for children in oncology wards and arrived with laminated charts. A chef flew in from Osaka who didn't speak Korean, worked through an interpreter, and had once cooked for a prime minister. They turned that kitchen into a laboratory. Fish steamed 9 different ways. Sweet pumpkin whipped to velvet. Rice porridge from stock, reduced for a day and a half. A dessert with gold leaf on it, which Dr. Seo quietly put in the bin. 140 dishes in 8 days. Yerin ate none of them. Not a spoonful. They'd bring it to her mouth, she'd turn her head to the left and look at the wall, and after a while the nurse would take it away and write it down. And on 4 of those 8 nights, between midnight and 2 in the morning, a covered bowl appeared on the rolling table. Every one of them was empty by morning. That's what started to unmake him. 5 of the best cooks in Asia, no cap on the budget, and his daughter refused all of it, while somebody walked into his house in the dark, and she swallowed. 40 milliliters one night, 60 another. One night the nurse wrote that the patient held a bowl with both hands, and Dr. Seo underlined it and put it on his desk without comment. He stopped sleeping. He sat in the dark at the end of the corridor, in a chair from the dining room with his jacket still on, waiting. And whoever it was knew that house better than he did. Twice he sat until 4 in the morning, and nothing came. The 3rd night he gave up at 2:30, lay down, and woke at 6 to a bowl with 2 spoonfuls gone. He wasn't frightened. He was something worse. He was being helped, in his own house, by somebody who wouldn't show themselves. And every bowl was a sentence he couldn't read. On the 11th night, he did the one thing he hadn't tried. He stopped hunting and started listening. 2 in the morning, on the edge of his daughter's bed, the lamp out in the corridor was on, the way it always was. He had never once wondered who turned it on. Did somebody bring you food? Nothing. The beep of the monitor, the little sound of the air handling. Yerin. I'm not angry. I want to thank them. And his daughter, who had not reached for one thing since March, slid her hand out from under the rabbit blanket and put it on top of his. That was all. She left it there, and then she went to sleep. And Cha Jin-woo sat on the edge of that bed for a very long time, with his eyes shut and his mouth pressed shut too, because there were 3 men asleep 2 floors down who worked for him, and he was not going to be a man who made a sound in the dark. The next morning, he went down to the service level and did something nobody in that building had ever seen him do. He walked into the staff corridor. Grey floor, humming strip lights, laundry carts, steam and detergent. Bae Sun-ok nearly dropped a stack of pillowcases. 11 people on that shift lined up against the wall the way people do, and he stood in front of them in a grey suit with his hands loose at his sides. Somebody in this house is cooking for my daughter. You've all been told not to go to that floor. I'm not asking so I can punish anyone. I'm asking because she ate. 4 seconds of silence. Step forward, and there's no trouble. You have my word, and everyone here knows what that's worth. Nobody moved. He went down the line. Face, face, face. He got to the 9th person, and his eyes went past her and kept going. She was standing right there. 28 years old, 5'6", hair pulled back, a grey uniform with a badge on it that had her name printed in Korean and in English. She had cooked 6 of those bowls. She was looking at the floor, because that's what you're trained to do, and her heart was going so hard she thought the woman beside her could hear it. He looked past her. He thanked them all for their time. He left. So she did the only thing left. That night she cooked a 7th bowl, and this time she waited. She stood behind the door of the linen alcove 12 feet down the hall, with her hands folded, and she let him find her. He came around the corner at 1:15 in the morning, in shirt sleeves, collar open, the ink on his neck showing. He stopped dead. Neither of them said anything. She had rehearsed 6 versions of this, and every one of them left her head. "It was you!" "Yes, sir." "Every night?" "Not every night. 6 of them." He took a step closer and stopped. The way you do with an animal you don't want to move. And then he asked her the question that turned the whole thing over, quietly. It cost him something. "What is your name?" The floor went strange under her. She had carried his sheets and his water and his daughter's laundry for 6 years. She had left a lamp outside that child's door for 4. And he was standing 3 feet away in his own hallway, asking her name, like a man who had just arrived. "Nia," she said. "Nia Whitfield. How long have you worked here?" 6 years, sir. Since I was 22. He didn't have one thing to say, and to his credit, he didn't pretend otherwise. He looked at her, actually looked, for 5 full seconds. And what was on his face wasn't gratitude. It was a man realizing he had been walking past a door in his own house for 6 years. He took her into the small sitting room off the corridor at 1:30 and told her to sit down, which she did, on the edge of a chair worth more than her mother's car. "Whatever you've been making, I want it made every day, 3 times a day. You'll stop the other work, all of it. Name a number." "Sir." "Whatever the number is, double it, and your visa comes off the household contract this week, so you understand you're not tied to anything." He was already moving, already solving it, already spending. "If there are people at home who need money, tell me who and how much." And Nia Whitfield looked at her hands and said no to $100 million man. "You can't pay me for it. Everyone says that first. No, sir. I'm not negotiating with you." She looked up. "I'll cook for her every day and twice on Sunday, and you don't have to pay me one more than you already do. But you're trying to buy something that was given to me for free. I can't sell it. It isn't mine. It isn't yours. No. Then whose is it?" She didn't answer him. She said good night, sir, and left him standing in that room at 2 in the morning. She hadn't decided yet whether she would ever tell him. Because the second she did, everything about her life in that building was over. The grits were her grandmother's. That part she could say out loud. But for 8 days, mixed in among the grits, on the nights the child ate the most, she had been making something else. Rice. A whole pear grated in, honey stirred through at the end, cooked down 4 hours until it was the color of cream. She hadn't learned that from Odessa Whitfield. She learned it in the East Kitchen, 4 years ago, standing at a copper pot with the woman whose name nobody in that house was allowed to say. They moved her upstairs the next day and gave her the main kitchen. The man from Gangnam went home. The woman with the laminated charts stayed on as a consultant and became, unexpectedly, an ally. And for 2 weeks it worked. 40 milliliters became 120. Yerin started sitting up on her own to eat, which nobody had asked her to do. On a Thursday, Dr. Seo came out of the suite with a printout and a voice that had lost its professional flatness. Her liver enzymes are down 22%. Whatever is happening in that kitchen, do not change one thing about it. She still wouldn't ask for anything. But she watched the door now. That was new. Around 11 in the morning, she'd start watching the door, and Cha Jin-woo, who hadn't eaten a proper meal in 9 days, started coming down to that kitchen. He told himself it was an oversight. He'd stand in the doorway in shirt sleeves, with his hands in his pockets, and watch a young woman stir a pot for 20 minutes. Neither of them said much. Then he'd go back upstairs and close a deal that ruined somebody. The fourth time, she took a second bowl down from the shelf, without asking him anything, filled it, set it on the counter with a spoon beside it, and went back to the stove. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he ate it, standing up, at the counter, with his sleeves rolled. That was the first time anybody had fed that man in 4 years, not his daughter. Him. On the 12th day he walked in, and she had a small clay pot going instead of the steel pan, and the smell in that room stopped him in the doorway like a hand on his chest. Pear. Honey. Rice cooked down for hours. He went a color that made her put the spoon down. Where did you get that? Sir? That. Where did you get that? Not loud. Worse than loud. My wife made that. Nobody else made that. She wouldn't even write it down for the cook. She said it was... And he stopped. Because he had said my wife out loud, in a room with another person in it, for the first time in 4 years. Nia stood with her hand still on the handle of the pot, and understood that the next thing she said would change everything. She said it anyway. She taught me, 4 years ago. In the East kitchen, she asked me to. 11 seconds of silence. She counted, because there was a clock. That's not possible. It's in her notebook. She wrote it out for me, because I kept getting the pair wrong. It's still in there, sir. Shelf above the pot rack, behind the rice jars. Nobody's opened that room in 4 years, and she watched a man she had been afraid of for 6 years walk out of her kitchen, down the corridor, and stop in front of a set of double doors he had closed with his own hands on a July night. He put his palm flat against them and stood there. It took him 4 minutes. Then he opened them. And what came out was dust and cold copper and, underneath it, very faintly, sesame oil. Because a kitchen remembers longer than a house does. Flour still in the tin. A chipped blue bowl in the drying rack that nobody had put away. And low down on the inside of the door, at the height of a 2-year-old, a crayon scribble he had never seen in his life. On the shelf above the pot rack, behind the rice jars, a notebook with a soft cover, swollen with damp, stained brown in 3 places, filled with a woman's fast, slanting hand. He sat down on the floor of that kitchen in a $4,000 suit and turned the pages. Han So-yeon was 24 when she married him, and 31 when she died. Her family had money the old way, and disapproved of him thoroughly. She married him anyway, on a Wednesday, with 9 people present. She was funny in a dry way that took people a while to catch. She had bad knees, she couldn't carry a tune, and she refused, from the beginning, to stop cooking, even in a house full of staff. That was the running argument of the entire marriage. He thought it looked like they couldn't afford help. She thought a person who never cooks for anyone slowly becomes a stranger in their own life. So she kept the East kitchen, her room, the one place in 40 floors that was hers. And 4 years ago, already sick, losing weight, sleeping in the afternoons, she went looking for somebody to teach. Not the chef, not Bae Sun-ok. She picked the tall, quiet American girl of 24, who came up with the linen and said, in perfectly good Korean, that the pot smelled like something her grandmother made. They cooked together 11 times. Nia never told anybody. Who would she tell? The head housekeeper, that the lady of the house was teaching the laundry girl to make porridge, so it stayed private. 11 afternoons, window open, radio on low. So-yeon talked while she cooked, about her mother, who was impossible, about her husband, who worked like a man being chased, about being tired all the time now, and the appointments she hadn't told him about yet, because once he knew, it would stop being her illness and become his emergency. And on the last afternoon, in October, she wrapped Nia's hand around the wooden spoon and said the thing Nia Whitfield would carry in her chest for 4 years and never once put down. If Yerin ever forgets me, Feed her this. Don't explain it. Just feed her. She died 5 weeks later, and a 24-year-old girl with a visa and a grandmother on dialysis went back down to the laundry and said nothing for 4 years, because there was a rule in that house about that woman's name. On the floor of that kitchen, Cha Jin-woo turned to a page with a pear drawn on it in ballpoint, badly, with an arrow, and the words "Great, do not chop, I mean it," and made a sound. And from the doorway behind him, Nia said the only true thing she had left. "I've been waiting 4 years for somebody to let me in." They cleaned that kitchen out together on a Sunday. Just the two of them, window open, no staff, no security in the room. He carried the old rice jars out himself. He found a hair clip in a drawer, stood holding it for a while, and put it in his pocket. And Nia scrubbed 4 years of dust off a copper pot, with her sleeves shoved up past her elbows, and taught the head of a criminal organization how to grate a pear. He was terrible at it. He held the wooden spoon like a man signing a document and stirred like he was in a hurry, and the mixture caught on the bottom. And she said, without thinking about it at all, "No, like this," and put her hand over his and moved it. 4 seconds. Her hand on the back of his hand, the pot hissing, flour on his sleeve. Nobody had corrected that man about anything in 7 years. He didn't look at her. He looked at the pot. He swallowed. He said, "Again." She took her hand back and said, "Slower." Neither of them mentioned it. Not then, not later. What he said that afternoon, on a stool with the notebook open in front of him, was harder. "She knew your name." "Yes. She was teaching you in this room, while I was upstairs on the phone." He turned a page. 11 times. "Yes, sir." "She told you she was sick before she told me." There was no kind way to answer that, so Nia gave him the true one. "She told me she hadn't told you yet. She said the day you found out, it would stop being hers." He nodded slowly, and what was in his face wasn't grief and wasn't gratitude. The honest name for it is jealousy, ugly and small and human. His wife had had a friend in the last year of her life, somebody she laughed with, complained to, handed a spoon to. It hadn't been him. He'd been 40 floors up, buying the world. "Do you know what I bought her for her last birthday?" "No, sir." "A car. She never drove." He shut the notebook. "She wanted me to sit down in this room for 1 hour. I said next week. I said it about 30 times. And then, because this was exactly who he was, he stood up, straightened his cuffs and said, 6 o'clock tomorrow. Show me how much honey." For 11 days, that floor was almost a home. Yerin moved out of the medical suite into her own bedroom, which Dr. Seo signed off on with 3 pages of conditions. 200 milliliters, twice a day, holding the bowl herself. In the afternoons, she came down the corridor, holding somebody's hand, and stood on a step stool in the east kitchen while the pot went. One Tuesday, she dragged a finger through the sesame cream on top and put it in her mouth, and 3 adults in that room pretended not to notice, so she'd do it again. She still wouldn't ask for anything she wanted, but she started drawing, sheets and sheets of it. A tall woman with dark skin and a bun, always at a stove, always with a pot. And in every single drawing, a rabbit sitting next to the pot. Nobody could explain it. Nobody asked. Then it came apart, from 2 directions at once, and neither of them was the illness. The first was a man named Cho Byung-chul, who ran the 3rd largest organization in that city and had been waiting 11 months. Because a man who spends $100 million in under a year on a private hospital floor is a man whose accounts look strange, and a man who hasn't walked into a room in 11 months without checking his phone is a man who looks distracted. Cho was 58. He had watched a 29-year-old take the whole northern side of the river, and he had never once accepted it. He started small. A shipment held at Incheon by a customs officer who'd been reliable for 9 years. 2 construction sites in Mapo that suddenly couldn't get permits. A restaurant owner in Yongsan who'd paid Jin-woo's people every month for 11 years, and then, one Thursday, apologized, and said he'd been advised to pay somebody else. Yoon Tae-sik laid it out on the desk and said the thing he'd been holding in for a month. They think you've gone soft. They say the boss cooks now. Do they? With respect, it's not the cooking. You missed the Dongjak meeting to be in the kitchen. 9 men noticed. One of them told Cho. Tae-sik was 52, had served Jinwoo's father, and was the only man alive allowed to say that sentence. You need to be seen. So he went and was seen. It cost him 4 nights in a row away from that floor. That was the first direction. The second one walked in through the front door. Han Myung-ja, 67 years old, 5'1", 2 suitcases and a driver, and no phone call ahead. So-yeon's mother. She had never forgiven Jinwoo for what he did for a living, or for the 9-person wedding, or for the fact that her daughter died at 31 in a house paid for with money she didn't want to think about. She'd spent 2 years in Gyeongju, keeping her grief in a house with a garden. Then she heard her granddaughter was eating again. She was in that building 11 minutes before she found out who was cooking. An American girl, from the laundry. She's the household staff, and my daughter eats for her. And she is using my daughter's recipes in my daughter's kitchen. With my daughter's notebook open on the counter, her voice never rose. That was the frightening thing about her. It never rose. Do you know what people are going to say? I don't care what people say. You never have, and it has cost this family everything it ever had. The next morning she stood in the doorway of that kitchen and watched Nia Whitfield work for 4 full minutes without a word. Then she walked in, picked up the notebook, closed it, and held it against her chest. "Put it down," she said. "Ma'am, I need it for... You are staff." 1 step closer, very quiet. That is my daughter's hand on that page. My daughter is dead, and there is nothing left of her but this. And you have been in her room touching her things and cooking her food, and letting my granddaughter look at you like you're... She stopped, got hold of herself, finished it. "You will take nothing else from this family." And Nia said, "Yes, ma'am," took her hands off the counter, and stood there, while a grieving woman carried a notebook out of the room. She had it memorized anyway. Nobody knew that. Rice, pear, honey, 4 hours, and the rabbit shape you swirl into the sesame cream with the back of a spoon, which was never in the notebook at all, because So-yeon never wrote it down. But she needed that kitchen. 3 days later, she lost it. Madame Han went through the household files, because she was the kind of woman who goes through files. She found 2 things, and she brought both to her son-in-law on a Friday evening with her coat still on. The first was a phone log, 9 calls to a number in Baltimore, Maryland, from the house line on the service level, over 4 months. Each one is between 6 and 9 minutes, all of them between 1 and 3 in the morning. The second was a photograph, taken on a phone by somebody on the day shift. Cha Jin-woo, standing at a counter in his shirt sleeves, eating out of a bowl, while a young woman in a grey uniform stood 2 feet away, with her hand on the pot. She calls America in the middle of the night from your house. She has your child's trust, your dead wife's recipes, and now this. And there are men in this city deciding right now whether you are still someone to be afraid of. And Cha Jin-woo, 11 months, $100 million, 4 fronts on fire, no real sleep since March, made the worst decision of his life. Handle it. He did not say dismiss her. He held on to that distinction for exactly 19 hours before admitting to himself that it was worthless. 4:10 on a Saturday afternoon. Bae Sun-ok did it, because that's what a head housekeeper is for, and she cried while she did it, which somehow made it worse. Contract terminated, effective immediately. 1 month's pay. 30 minutes to clear the room. Nia asked 1 question. Does he know? He signed it. She packed a duffel bag and a backpack. 2 uniforms were left folded on the bed, because they weren't hers. Her mother's dog tags. A photograph of Odessa in a church hat. And the jar of yellow cornmeal, with the masking tape on the lid, which she stood holding for a second, then left on the counter, because there was a 6-year-old in that building who might still want it. She went down in the freight elevator, past the 40th floor without stopping. He was standing at the far end of the service corridor when the doors closed. She saw him. He saw her. He had his phone in his hand and a man beside him waiting for an answer about Incheon, and he did not say one word, because part of his guilt agreed with his mother-in-law, and because nobody had ever taught him how to stand in front of a person and admit he was wrong. He watched a service elevator close on her, and he let it. 40,000 won a night for a guest house room in Itaewon. 2 flights of stairs, a window facing a wall, a radiator that knocked. She sat on the edge of that bed with her bag still packed and did the math out loud, which is a thing she got from her grandmother. 1 month's pay, $400 in savings, a visa attached to nothing, and the 15th of the month is coming in 9 days. Then the phone rang at 3 in the morning, which is never good news from America. A woman from the dialysis center missed her Friday session. We've been trying to reach you. Her potassium was high enough that we sent her to the emergency room, honey. Odessa had missed Friday because Odessa had found out about a bill and decided, without telling anybody, to go twice a week instead of 3 times. Grandma, no, baby, you've been sending me money for 6 years. That's my job. That is literally the job. A long crackling pause on a hospital phone, 11,000 kilometers away. You lost that job, didn't you? And Nia Whitfield, 28 years old, sitting on a stranger's bed, in a country that wasn't hers, with a bag she hadn't unpacked, said, "Yes, ma'am," and cried harder than she had at 19. 5 days later, on the 40th floor of a tower in Hanam-dong, Cha Ye-rin stopped eating. Not gradually. Completely. The bowl came in. She turned her head. She looked at the wall. The second day she pushed it off the rolling table with the flat of her hand and let it break on the floor. The loudest thing that child had done in 5 months. They brought back the man from Osaka, the pumpkin, the fish. The stock was reduced for a day and a half. Dr. Seo restarted the feeding line on the 3rd day with her mouth in a line. On the 6th day, she walked into that office, put a printout on the desk, and didn't sit down. Enzymes up 19%, weight down 600 grams. I want to be very clear, so there's no confusion later. She tapped the paper twice. I can chart her liver. I cannot chart whether she wants to be alive. Something in this house was making her want to be alive, and you got rid of it. And Madame Han, arms folded by the window, said, "She is a child. She will eat when she is hungry enough." And Dr. Seo Min-kyung looked at her and said, "With respect, ma'am." Her mother stopped eating too. At the end, children learn how to leave from watching. Nobody said anything for a while after that. He went in at 11 that night, the way he had 260 times. Jacket over the back of the chair. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't talk about the weather. He sat in the dark and looked at his daughter. 17 kilograms, 16.4 now. A line going back into her chest. And said the first honest thing he'd said in that room in 4 years. "I know why you stopped asking about her." Her eyes moved. "Because I stopped saying her name." His hand on the blanket. "I thought if we didn't say it, it would hurt you less." That was. He had to stop and start again. That was cowardice. It was mine, and I put it on you. And his daughter, who had not asked him for anything in 5 months, turned her head, looked directly at him, and said a name so quietly he wasn't sure he'd heard it. He leaned in. "Say it again. Ye-rin. Say it again." She said it again. Barely a breath. He got it that time. Nia. He was in the car 11 minutes later. It took a man with 300 people, and every phone number in that city, an hour and 40 minutes, to find out where a housemaid had gone. Which tells you everything about how well he had ever known her. Bae Sunok had the guest house name written on a receipt in her apron pocket. She'd gone to see her twice and brought her tangerines and never mentioned it to anybody. 1:30 in the morning. It's raining in Itaewon. He came up 2 flights of concrete stairs alone. Tae-sik stayed in the car and didn't like it, and stood in a corridor with a bare bulb in it outside room 204, in a grey suit with rain in his hair, and knocked. She opened it on the chain. She'd been crying and didn't bother to hide it, and she didn't open the door any further. Mr. Cha. She stopped eating. 9 days. They've put the line back in. I know how that ends. I need you to come back. And Nia Whitfield, with her bag still packed on the floor behind her, said, no. He could have offered money here. He'd worked out the number in the car, a number with a lot of zeros in it. And standing in that corridor, he understood, for the first time in his adult life, that he had nothing in his hands worth anything to the person in front of him. So he took the chain off the conversation instead. I'm not here as your employer. You don't work for me. I signed that paper. I stood in a corridor and watched an elevator door close on the only person who's helped my daughter in a year, and I said nothing, because a woman I'm afraid of told me to, and because I'm a coward about my wife. Rain, ticking on a window somewhere. Everything I have to offer you is insulting, so I'm just asking. She looked at him for a long time. My grandmother's in a hospital in Baltimore, because I lost that job. Then let me know. See, that's the thing. She shook her head slowly. If I come back because of you, I will disappear again. I've been furniture in that house for 6 years, and I can't do it twice. She pulled the door open the rest of the way, and her voice cracked right down the middle. But that baby has been through enough, so I'll come for her, not for you. Then she picked up the bag she had never unpacked, because honestly, she'd known from the first night that she was going back. But she stopped in the corridor and turned around and gave him her terms. 3 things. 1, I'm not on a household contract. You write me a real one, in my name, and it says what I actually do. 2, I go into that kitchen, and nobody stands in the door telling me whose spoon I'm holding. Not your mother-in-law, not you. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. 3, when this is over, whichever way it goes, I need a month at home. I have a grandmother in Baltimore who has been paying for my career with her own blood, and I haven't sat in a room with her in 6 years. He said yes 3 times. Then he carried her bag down 2 flights of concrete stairs in the rain himself, which Yoon Tae-sik watched from the car with an expression he'll take to his grave. They got back to the tower at 3:20. Madame Han was standing in the lobby in a housecoat because somebody on the night desk had told her the car went out. A full minute in that marble lobby where nobody moved. You went and got her. I did. Do you understand what you're doing to me? And Cha Jin-woo said, very quietly, Yerin asked for somebody tonight, mother. First thing she's asked for since March. It wasn't you, and it wasn't me. And he walked past her to the elevator with a maid's duffel bag in his hand. She didn't go straight to the child. That was the first smart thing she did. She went to the east kitchen at 3:20 in the morning, put the small clay pot on the gas ring, and cooked. Rice, rinsed 4 times, because Soyeon was militant about that. A whole pear, grated, not chopped, I mean it, skin and all, which is the part everybody gets wrong. The flame so low she had to bend down to see it. 4 hours of it. Water added in small amounts, 7 times. Honey at the end, off the heat, because honey turns bitter if you boil it. 1 spoonful of toasted sesame cream stirred through until the whole thing was the color of the inside of a shell. And then, with the back of a spoon, she drew a rabbit with cream on top. That was the thing that was never in the notebook. Soyeon did it on a bad afternoon in November to make a 2-year-old stop crying. She did it maybe 20 times. And there was exactly 1 other living person on the planet who had ever seen it done. The sun came up at 6:10. She carried the bowl up the corridor at 7:20, and the whole household was standing in it. Bae Sunok, 2 nurses, Dr. Seo, with a clipboard she wasn't looking at, Yoon Tae-sik against the wall, pretending to check a phone, Madame Han at the far end with her hands folded in front of her, and a father in the doorway who hadn't slept. She went in alone and shut the door most of the way. Yerin was awake. Grey light, the line taped to her chest, 16.4 kilograms. When she saw who it was, her whole face came apart, and she got her arms up off that blanket and reached, and Nia Whitfield sat down on the edge of the bed and let a 6-year-old hold onto her neck for as long as she wanted. Then she sat her up against the pillows, put the bowl in her lap, and did not say one word about eating. She said, "Look what's in there." Yerin looked down at a rabbit, drawn in sesame cream, and went completely still. And then that child, who hadn't said her mother's name in 4 years, who hadn't eaten in 9 days, who had pushed a bowl off a table and broken it on the floor, put one finger on the edge of that rabbit, looked up, and said it out loud, clearly, loud enough for the corridor to hear, "Omma, Mama," not to Nia. Nobody ever misunderstood that. Not for 1 second, not then, not later. She said it to the bowl, because a shape had come back that only one person had ever made, and a 2-year-old's memory that everybody in that house had decided was gone had been sitting inside her for 4 years, waiting for the right thing to be put in front of it. Out in that corridor, a man went down onto one knee with his hand over his mouth. Madame Han didn't move for a moment. Then she walked into that room. Nobody stopped her. Everybody in that hallway thought the same thing at the same time, and nobody had the nerve to move. And she looked at the bowl, and she looked at the rabbit. And Han Myung-ja, 67 years old, who had not sat on a floor since she was a girl, sat down on the floor of her granddaughter's bedroom in a housecoat and cried in a way that had no dignity in it at all. She used to do that, she said, with her thumb. When she was little, I used to do it for her. She looked up at the young woman on the bed. How do you know that? She showed me. In your daughter's kitchen, 4 years ago. She said if Yerin ever forgot her, feed her this, and don't explain it. Madame Han put her hand flat on the floor. And you kept that for 4 years and told nobody. There was a rule in this house about her name, ma'am. And she watched an old woman turn around and look at her son-in-law in the doorway. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything to say. Yerin ate 180 milliliters that morning. Dr. Seo wrote the number down twice, because her hand was unsteady the first time. The miracle isn't the part that matters most. The receipt is. At 11 o'clock that same morning, Cha Jin-woo walked into his office, sat down, and did 4 things in 90 minutes. Every one of them was a door closing. He had a contract drawn up in the name of Nia Whitfield, salaried, a title that had never existed in that house before, and separate, independent sponsorship, so her right to be in that country stopped depending on his goodwill. He signed it and had it in her hand by lunchtime. He called Baltimore and put a woman named Odessa Whitfield in private care at a facility on the east side. 3 sessions a week, transport included, prepaid 4 years out, in a trust with a trustee who wasn't him, so it couldn't be taken away in a bad month or a bad mood. He never told Nia he'd done it. Odessa told her at 2 in the morning, hollering, and he called Dr. Seo Min-kyung and asked her a question nobody had ever heard him ask. How many children are on the transplant nutrition list at your old hospital? Around 200. Why? Because I spent $100 million on one child, and what saved her cost about 4,001, and came out of a pot. A pause. Tell me what a real ward needs, not what you think I'll agree to. What he built took 19 months. It's on the 4th floor of a children's hospital in Seoul, and it has 11 family kitchens in it. Small ones. A gas ring, a rice cooker, a fridge, and a door that shuts, so that a mother or a grandmother or an aunt from anywhere in the world can come in at 4 in the morning and make the one thing her child will eat. A staff of 8, and a program that pays for a family member's flight and visa if the child's food only exists in a country they can't get to. They named it the Rabbit Kitchen. Yerin named it. She was asked, and she said it immediately, like it was obvious. In the 4 years since, that unit has fed 960 children, and the woman who runs the family program is from Baltimore, Maryland. But before any of that, there was a Thursday evening in the East Kitchen. The notebook came back. Madame Han brought it herself, walked in with it in both hands, put it on the counter, and did not apologize, because women like that don't apologize. They issue corrections. 2 things, she said. You will not call her staff in front of my granddaughter again. That was to Jin Woo, not to Nia. And you will sit down when she cooks. You stand in that doorway like a guard at a bank. It's rude, and it makes the food nervous. She stayed for dinner. She argued with a 6-year-old about how much honey was too much honey. She lost. There were 14 pages left at the back of that notebook that Nia had never turned to, because they weren't recipes and she'd never had the right. Jin Woo turned them that Thursday, on a stool, with his sleeves rolled. The last page had 2 lines on it, in a woman's fast, slanting hand, dated 6 days before she died. Yerin, this is how you make it. Don't be scared of the fire. Jin Woo, somebody is going to have to remind you to eat, too. Let her. He read it 4 times. Then he turned it around and put it on the counter, facing the woman at the stove. And Nia Whitfield read her own permission slip, written 4 years earlier by a dying woman who had picked her out of a laundry corridor on purpose and had to put both hands on that counter. She knew. She always knew. He almost laughed. That was the whole problem with being married to her. And then, because he wasn't a man who could say a large thing directly, he took down 2 bowls instead of 1. He set them on the table by the north window, and he pulled out a chair. Sit down, he said. You've fed this house for 6 years. Nobody in it has ever set a place for you. 6 years of eating, standing up in a staff pantry off a grey corridor. She sat down, and he served her out of her own pot, badly, spilling some. And at some point in that meal, he put his spoon down and said his wife's name out loud, to another person, for the first time in 4 years. So-yeon, I know, she said. I miss her too. And he reached across that table and took her hand, and neither of them let go, while down the hall, a 6-year-old stood on a step stool arguing with her grandmother about honey. No wedding, no speech. 3 chairs at a table that used to seat nobody at all, and a man who spent $100 million finally learned the name of the person who'd been keeping a light on outside his daughter's door for 4 years. That recipe was in his house the whole time. 11 feet of hallway from the room where he signed wire transfers to Copenhagen. The woman knew it was in his house too, folding his sheets, buying cornmeal with her own money, and he walked past her about 200 times. And he wasn't a monster. That's what makes it hurt. He was a man who thought love was something you go out and purchase in large quantities, and he never once looked down at the floor he was standing on. So tell me in the comments, who is in your life right now that you have walked past? The neighbor, the aide at your mother's home, the woman who's been at the front desk for 9 years, and you don't know her name. Go find out this week. And if this one got you, hit like and subscribe, because I've got another one coming that will absolutely wreck you. Bring tissues. I'll see you on the 40th floor.